Hi, I'm Robert Joseph, and today I'm going to teach you how to make this bandeau dress. Now I have two dresses here. One is a full size, and then I have this one here, which is a half size. And the reason I have a half size is because this is actually the one I'm going to be making in the video. So I shrunk down the full size pattern to a half size so that all of the pattern pieces could actually fit into the frame of the video. However, everything is exactly the same for you. All of the seam allowances, the hem allowances, and the elastic that I use. Now there is elastic up here at the top of the dress. You're going to need 3/4 inch wide elastic. And of course I have straps on both of these, but of course the straps are optional. Now there is no internal bandeau in this, so this is really meant to be more of a cover-up. However, you could definitely wear this as an actual garment. Know that this was made for knit fabric because it will need to stretch around your body. There are suggestions on the pattern for different lengths. This is the full length, which actually hits just above the knee. And then, as you can see here, even though this is half size, this is actually coming a little bit shorter. It actually hits about between the hip and the upper knee. So another thing is on the full size here that I've made, I've chose to use a cover stitch for the top elastic and for the hem. However, if you don't have a cover stitch, just follow along in the video because I use a zigzag stitch around the upper bust and the hem. A couple of things about these videos before we begin. So this is a really long video and there are chapter markers below for you to skip ahead. But I will warn you that if you do skip ahead, you may be missing valuable information along the way. So I know that I do get kind of long-winded and wordy sometimes, but I'm really trying to give you the most information I can to actually help you to make your garments come out as best that you can. Another thing is that I don't really do voiceovers. I'm actually narrating as I'm sewing and making the garment. So sometimes I stumble and use the wrong word and then correct myself. And I don't really go back and correct those because I actually correct myself as I'm going along. And it actually makes the editing of these videos a little bit easier and quicker. So I just prefer narrating the video so that way you get kind of the feeling about how I work. And if you were actually taking a class with me, what it would be like, and I'm hoping that I don't scare you. One last thing is that I don't put background music in my videos anymore. I was having too many problems with people claiming the copyright on the music that I was making for my own videos. So all I can suggest is to put some music on in the background. So now enough with all of the boring little housekeeping things. Let's get to actually making your garment. Okay, so we're ready to get started cutting the fabric out. And again, I just want to remind you that my patterns are half size. So what I've done with the fabric is I've cut the fabric down to half size as well. So I just want to remind you about that. So the reason I did that again is so that I could get all the pattern pieces and fabric cutting and all the sewing on them all in the frame of the video. So sometimes the patterns get too big and it's too hard to put everything into the frame of the video. So my patterns are half size. They're exactly the same patterns as what you have. All of the notches are the same, all the seam allowances are the same, and the hems, I'm using all those same amounts. It's just that the proportion of the pattern is half size of whatever size that you're using. So now let's just go quickly look at the pattern really quick. I do have some notches here. This side notch here, you'll notice that the back is slightly shorter than the front. And the reason for that is because we need a little bit of fullness here. That's what this is here for the bust. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to actually stretch the back a little bit to get the front to fit in with that. And that creates that little extra room that your bust will need going across the front. These other notches here, there's one here, there's a castle notch here, and there's a triangle notch here. These are not for the elastic that goes around the top, but these are actually for strap placement. That's what this pattern piece is for. So once we get the strap all ready to go, this is just for placement. And you're going to need to mark these notches before you actually put the elastic on. And I'll show you that once we get to it. So I usually speed up the fabric cutting. So that's what I'm going to do here. Again, I'm just going to remind you that my fabric, I've cut it down half size. And I like to fold the fabric, cut, and then fold again. Some companies on their pattern, just as an FYI, some patterns will have you actually fold the edges of the fabric or the selvages of the fabric in to meet each other like this. And of course, you want to do it more even than that. And then lay the one pattern here on the fold and then the other pattern and cut out that way. But sometimes you waste fabric doing that. So I actually like to fold as I cut. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Okay, so the other thing that you're going to need is your elastic, and that's for the top of the bandeau. So I'm using 3/4 inch wide elastic. I've pre-cut it, so please refer to the pattern. It should be directly printed on the pattern, my suggestions for the elastic width. And this is actually going to be sewn into a ring. And I will show you how to do that once we get to that in the tutorial. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to join the front and the back body pieces, so we don't need the elastic or the straps right now. And I can actually just move these pattern pieces away. These will go into the library. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out my back piece. Actually, let's lay out the front piece. So with the face side up, or the right side, I tend to say face side. So here is my front body piece. And I have my notches here. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my back body piece and I'm going to match this face side, the face side of the back body piece, to the face side of the front piece. And I'm first just going to match up those notches, and I'm just going to put a pin in it. And I like to pin in the direction of the sewing, whether you're going to sew from the top or the bottom. And I usually like to sew from the bottom up. So I'm going to start on this side. Let me move this closer to the center, right? And then I will match the bottom and pin again in the direction of the sewing, and then just following that outside edge. Now, of course, if you're advanced, you don't have to pin. So here we have this little bit of extra, so I'm just going to match this up to the top. Now, when you match your seams where you have points going in two different directions, the intersection of that point area, and I don't know if you can see that, the intersection of these point areas, that's actually your seam allowance. So that's my 1/4 inch. So I'm going to put that pin there. So one side will actually dip lower, and one side will point up higher. So it's that point that the needle sews on the stitch line, that's actually your seam allowance. And you can see there's just a little bit. Now, if you look at this, you'll see the front is actually bowing outward. We don't want that to happen. We actually want the edges, the cut edges, to match up, and we'll just stretch that just a tiny bit while we're in the machine sewing the seam. So what I'm going to do, since there are really no other seams on this, I'm going to go ahead and pin the other side, and I'll just sew both sides at the same time, individually, but while I'm in there. And I'm going to turn this over to the front side. Now this is the wrong side of the front, and I'm going to pin exactly like I did before. And the reason for that is because I'm sewing from the bottom up, so your pins will be on opposite sides. It's a good idea in general sewing, and if you're a beginner, this is a great beginner project, to sew in the same direction. For instance, if I'm sewing this seam from the hem to the top, when I come over to the other side, it's a good idea to also sew from the hem to the top. Sometimes on really stretchy fabrics, if I sewed from the hem to the top on here, and then from the top to the hem here, we might get some pulling in two different directions. So if there's any kind of, and then when you wear it, it will seem like it's kind of off. So you want to make sure that you're sewing from the same direction on all your seams. So let me just get this top here pinned on this side correctly. And now I'm ready to go over to the overlock and get these seams sewn up. All right, so we're ready to sew these side seams. And just one quick note before I actually do this is when you start your seam, of course, lift your presser foot up. And the best way to start is actually to move the fabric all the way up under. Here, this is the knife right here. So make sure your edge is kind of guiding along with that knife. And then go ahead and push it up. Push your fabric up pretty close to the needles. Now, in a lot of cases, your feed dogs, which are here, and let me bring the feed dog up here so you can kind of see that. These are the feed dogs. So sometimes it will actually take the fabric before you get it actually in there. Sometimes it doesn't, and what it does is it just sits there and it just kind of ruins the edge of your fabric. So I always like to take my fabric, push it up all the way up to where the needles are, and then push the presser foot down. That way you know you're going to get an even feed at the beginning of your seam. Another note, you might notice that my pins that I pinned are a ways away from the edge. And the more you work with your overlock machine, you'll get to know the width of your presser foot here. And if you actually pin your fabric a little bit further than the presser foot width, you won't actually have to remove the pins. So let's see if I did that all the way through. So I'm getting ready to sew this now. Okay, so I'm coming up to this notch now, and as you saw me in the fabric cutting, the notches should be cut on the outside of the perimeter of the fabric. So these notches will actually be cut off. And then as we move past that, this is the part where I actually need to stretch the back a little bit, and we're going to ease that front piece, which is here, and we're going to ease it right into the back piece. And it's okay if it's stretched a little bit. It's going to hold that in once it's sewn. And it looks like I didn't actually get this pin far enough. So once I sew just a little bit more, then I'm going to take this pin out. But I'm going to make sure that I keep these notches right there in place. And then the knife will actually cut off that extra fabric from the notch. Okay, so just really quickly, this was the area of the front, and you can see there's just a little bit of bubbling, and that's all we really need. It's just going to give a little bit more room to the bust area. So that's what it will look like when you're done stitching. And then on this side, it actually looks flat. This is the back side. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew up the other side without stopping. Okay, so now that we have the side seam sewn, we have the opportunity to either work with the straps or the elastic. And I'm going to opt to work with the elastic because I'm going to get the elastic sewn into the top before. Now, you could actually prepare the straps and get the straps sewn to the face side. But what happens sometimes is that with the straps in these areas, that creates a thickness that is hard to go through the overlock machine. So I'm going to put the elastic on first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually grab some chalk and I'm going to actually mark where those notches are. Those are the front ones, and then I'm going to mark the back ones. And the reason I'm doing that is because once I sew the elastic to the garment, these notches are going to be cut off. So I need to remember where the strap placement notches are. So how do we prepare the elastic? Well, so basically you have your strand of elastic. We're going to mark either ends, a 1/2 inch on either end, and I'm just going to eye it. Of course, use a ruler. I didn't grab the ruler before I started this, so sorry about that. So I'm marking approximately about a 1/2 inch in, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a ring, and I'm going to be putting those marks right on top of each other, and then I will just pin it together. So make sure that your ring doesn't have any twists in it. And then all we need to do with the straight stitch machine is straight stitch back and forth over this until it's secure. Okay, so now that we have our elastic ring sewn together, we're going to actually prepare it and the garment for applying it to the garment. So first we actually need to divide this ring into fourths. And the way I like to do that is just kind of fold it right on that seam to fold it in half. And you can either use a pin or you can just mark it with your chalk. I just like to do it with the chalk because that's actually a lot faster. So I'm just going to mark here just like that, just so we have an idea. And then I'm going to match that mark to that seam line, and that will be folded, and then we can fold this all the way flat, and I'm going to mark either end of this. So mark this one, that side, and then I'll mark that side. Okay, so now I have 4 equal marks all the way around. Now I've got to do that the same thing on the garment up here. We're applying the elastic to the top part of this bandeau. So one thing to note is that the side seams are not a perfect quarter. If you notice, the back piece is slightly smaller than the large piece. So in that case, it's gonna look a little bit different. I'm gonna actually mark this one with pins instead of the chalk because I already have chalk marks on here. So I need to find the center back and the center front, and I didn't put a notch there because I didn't want to confuse you with the strap placement notches. So it's basically the center of those 2 notches. So basically if you fold these 2 notches together, that's going to be the center back. And I'm going to fold these 2 notches together, and the folded area is the center front. Now to find the other equals, all I have to do is match up these pins like that, hold on to that, and then be careful not to stretch, and then you'll just walk your cut edges along very carefully along, and you see there's a little bit extra. That's where you're going to put your other pin. That's the fold, or that's the quarter of the circumference of the top. And I'm going to do the same thing with this side. Just carefully walk it, and you should have some extra here. Sometimes this fabric likes to stick to itself. So there's my other marking point. All right, so now I have all of my pins marked, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to match my marks on my ring to the pins on the top. So, and it's got to go in circular fashion. So this is the wrong side of the garment. So I'm going to take my seam mark and I'm going to match that to the center back. And I'm also going to pin this in the direction of the sewing. So I'm actually going to be using the overlock to put this on so that it's going to be sewing this way. So I'm going to just unpin this, or you could use another pin, and then I'll repin this. And then all I need to do is walk the elastic around. You don't have to stretch the garment or the elastic, just walk it around to the next pin mark. And we're matching the edge of the elastic to the edge of the garment. I'm going to pin it like that and then continue walking around. There's the center front. I'm going to match that mark to the pin. And I have one more to match. There's the last one. Okay, and so let's go ahead and have a look at this. So that's it pinned, and notice that you have, fabric. The garment is actually larger than the elastic. We want that because you want it to hold on to the body. So as we sew, we're going to stretch the elastic to match the size of the fabric. And we're also going to be careful. We're going to make sure that the fabric edge is matching the edge of the elastic. And if you stretch a little bit further, if you stretch the elastic to fit the fabric and then a little bit further, that's okay as well. So sometimes it's hard to gauge how much you're supposed to stretch. But one of the things that you do want to look at is it's always nice to have these side seams folded going toward the back. So once we get in the machine, you'll see me do that. I'm not going to really talk you through that this time, but what you're going to want to do is get this into the machine, and you'll put it at a slight angle to get it started until you get a good edge here, stitch on the edge, and then you'll straighten out, and you'll see me do that. And then I'm going to stretch this elastic to match the garment size and maybe just a little bit more. So let's go over to the overlock and get this stitched on. Okay, so I decided that I would walk you through just this beginning part. Now, I am putting this on with the overlock machine. You can, of course, attach this with a zigzag machine or zigzag stitch on your regular sewing machine. That's fine. But I'm going to do this with the overlock. I like doing it this way. So to get started here, what I said about the angle, make sure that your edges of your fabric and the edges of your elastic are matching. And then you'll just kind of put this up here in under the presser foot, kind of at an angle, but be careful about that knife that you're not cutting in. So you're just kind of get it started here at an angle, so your stitching up here comes on at an angle. That's how you kind of get these circles started. So I'm actually going to remove this pin and then make sure everything again is at the edge. And remember, your notch here will be cut off, but you'll still have the marking on this side so you know where to put your strap. So I'm just going to go ahead and get this started on an angle. Put that presser foot down and okay. So that's how it starts. And the reason I usually take the sound off at this point is because my machine is kind of loud. And I'll just sew this for a little bit. That was the notch that was just cut away. And my pin is still in place, and a lot of times I'll just grab where it's supposed to match to, the point here, and just kind of stretch and match the elastic to the width of the garment. maybe just a little bit more. And here I can pull, if I've got too much fabric here, I kind of slide that fabric underneath to match the edge of the elastic. And then I'm going to stitch some more. Just go slow. And then coming up to the seam line, right? I can actually take the pin out now because it's pretty stable at that point. Take this pin out, and then I can continue on my way. Now I'm coming up to the front here where I'm going to be stretching this, and again, I can actually just kind of move by my fingers here, pulling this fabric toward the elastic. I can get that in place. And sometimes if you use your hands here, kind of pull it here from behind, use your thumb to pull that down below the elastic, and then use your other fingers to kind of help it through the machine. Coming up to this other notch, and everything looks good there. I'm coming up to the center front, and I am stretching the elastic. I'm going to remove this pin, and there I am to the center front. So I've done all of this. I talked you through that. So I'm going to kind of just do the rest of this without talking. Okay, so I'm coming back to my original starting point, and you see that as I angled on here, I have this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that the stitching gets onto the other stitching, and then I will pull this out and stitch again. So have a look at this. Okay, I know that my stitching is over it. All I have to do is just kind of pull this all away, and then I'll just slowly stitch away, and that comes right out. All right, and that is all stitched on all the way around. And you can see here that I can still see my mark for where my straps are going to be put on. Okay, so we've got the elastic sewn onto the top of it, and we can still see our marks. I'm a little worried that, as my vision goes as I get older, I'm just going to actually put pins in where those are really quick for the time being, because we're actually going to switch over and we're going to prepare the straps now. So I'm going to flip this over and do that on the front, just so that I don't lose those locations. So the straps are going to be pretty easy. Get this pin in here, then I can set this aside. So here I have the two straps. And of course, the straps, you can shorten them or lengthen them for however you like. I just kind of measured this against my dress form. So if you need a little bit more length, add a little bit more length. If you need a little less, then go ahead and take a little bit off. Or if you want to do longer straps and have them separate, and just sew one to each side and keep them open, and then you can tie them, just tie the two together to make your shoulder straps. Of course, you don't have to have shoulder straps. This is an option, but I'm going to actually sew all of this together so you can see what it looks like with all the options. If you don't want shoulder straps, then you can skip this part and just go right to folding over the elastic and stitching it down, which is actually the next step after the strap. So to do the straps, it's really easy. So the way I'm going to do it is I've got my face side up. I'm going to fold it in half lengthwise, face side together. And I'm actually going to overlock this, and it's going to be 1/4 inch. Now, if you don't want to overlock this, you just want to use your straight stitch machine, you could fold each of the ends into the center and then fold it over again. And then straight stitch it down or zigzag it down. You can do that as well. But I'm actually going to use a turner. I have a loop turner, which I will bring in the next step. So again, I'm just folding this over lengthwise, and I may as well pin this just so you can see it. And these are going to be like smaller, narrow shoulder straps. Hopefully they will end up being about 1/4 inch wide. What they should be, because the seam is 1/4 inch wide, and I think that's how I made it, so that the 1/4 inch seam allowance will actually act as the filling. So now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to run this through the overlock on this side and get that done. All right, so we've got the straps sewn. They're ready to turn, and I've got this loop turner here, and it looks like a little crochet hook here with a little arm that opens and closes. So all I need to do is I'm going to insert this, come out the other side, and I'm going to grab that. And I like to grab I actually like to grab the seam allowance side and then kind of hook onto it. That's fine. And then, well, I didn't get that hooked on. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to kind of poke through that little arm here on that seam allowance. Don't break it. I'm having a little trouble here. All right, so there's the hook. Right, I've got it hooked on there. And then I'm actually going to pull this through. Just kind of get it to turn over on itself. You'll feel it turn, and then you can just kind of pull it through. You see how it's hooked on there? And take that off. Pull the rest of this through. I need to pull this, get this other end coming through. Sometimes if you take this, just kind of push that out. All right, so there's my strap. Now, if you want to, you could press this a little bit. Just press it lightly. And we're going to actually attach these to the garment now before we do the top stitching on the elastic. So I'm just going to finger press this. And you can feel the seam allowance in there kind of being the filling, which is kind of nice. It gives it a little bit more stability. Now, I cut this on the straight grain. It still does stretch, but it won't stretch a whole lot. But if you want to get maybe some of the stretch out and there's cotton in it, kind of soak it in some water, stretch it out, and then pin it to a board and leave it to dry overnight. And hopefully that will take out some of the extra stretch. I'm not really that worried about it at this point. So I'm going to leave that there. Now, if you don't have a loop turner, you can use a crochet hook, which is basically the same thing. You may not be able to latch the fabric in there, but it should actually work the same way, especially if you have a smaller crochet hook. If you don't have a crochet hook, leave one of the the stitch lines long. And if you have a tapestry needle or a needle with a really big eye, you can actually feed this thread through the eye and use that needle to force this back through the tunnel coming out this side, and then with your hand, once you get the thread out, kind of turn it inside out by using this thread. I'm just going to go ahead and turn this out really quick, and then I will get these all pinned up for sewing this to the garment. Okay, so let's get these straps to the garment. So I think I'm going to put the seam toward the side seams, and all I need to do is line this up to where that pin is, and I'm going to use that same pin. So I just kind of take this, hold on to that, and then pin it kind of in place. And I've gone through the elastic to give it a little bit more stability. And let's going to do this side, a seam allowance going toward the side seam. I just like to do it that way. There's no specific reason why, although the seam line will be less noticeable. So now, instead of going around and pinning this side, I'm going to go ahead and run this through the machine. I'm going to take a straight stitch right across here, right about where the edge of the overlocking is, and I'm just going to tack that with a straight stitch back and forth just to keep those in place, just right here. Okay, so before I stitch this with the sewing machine, I thought about this before I went over there. Because we would usually turn this, do the zigzag, and then I would usually top stitch right here, just to hold that from moving around when it's being worn. So if you don't want to have top stitching on the outside of your garment, we can also do a second tack stitch here. And let me see if I can use so I'm going to stitch here to hold everything down, and then I'm actually going to stitch, let me get this pinned on here a little bit straighter. Okay, so I'm going to stitch here. That's not very straight, is it? So I'm going to stitch across here. You get the idea, right here where the serge line is, or the overlock line. And then I'm going to feel here where the edge of the elastic is, and I'm going to stitch another stitch just on the strap area just below that. So there will be two tack stitches. So one will be right here, basically at the top of that elastic. And what that will do, it will hold that strap in place from moving around too far on you. And you'll see me do that in the machine. So I'm going to go do that right now. Okay, so now we've got the straps sewn onto the front. So we now need to get them on the back. So I'm going to fold the straps this way. And then I'm going to actually turn this over to the back. So make sure that your straps are flat and they're still going in the same direction. Remember, I had the seams going toward the side seams. So then what we're going to need to do is I'm going to flip this over, and then I have to actually tuck this up this way, because that's the way that the strap is going to be once we fold it. We want to make sure that there are no twists. So I'm going to do that again. So I folded. I've put the turned it over to see the back side. This is the front, and I'm laying these straps over, and I'm just kind of folding it the way the strap would normally go. And then this is the way it's coming from the front. And then I'm just going to fold this edge, the cut edge, up to loop it up onto where that pin is. And I'm going to pin that in place. And then I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing. Make sure the strap isn't twisted. Fold this up, fold it over to the back. And then take the end, I'm going to fold it under and right up into where the position is, that notch position. And then I'm going to pin this. Okay, and then I'm going to take this over to the machine. I'm going to stitch it exactly the same way I did on the front. Okay, so now we have the straps sewn on. All we need to do is turn this elastic, fold the elastic, make sure the edge here of the elastic that you're folding, this edge here, is flush. And I'm going to turn that in, and I like to pin it. Let's pin it in the direction that I'm sewing. So, okay, so basically I'm just turning this, make sure that it's flush. And sometimes it's good to actually just kind of stretch that elastic a little bit, because we're going to have to stretch it as we sew, because that elastic again is smaller. Okay, here at the seam line, let's fold that at the seam line. Make sure the edge is flush here. And I'll pin that down. And I'm going to use a zigzag stitch to get this on. Now if you have a cover stitch machine, so I'm stretching and then I'm kind of folding a little bit, and I'm making sure that this edge is nice and flush to the elastic. What I was saying about the cover stitch, if you have a cover stitch machine, you can of course use a cover stitch machine to actually do the top stitching with the double needle. Or if you don't have a cover stitch and you have a double needle and you know how to use it, you could also do stitch this down to the garment with a double needle. But I would suggest that you use like a bulky nylon or a woolly nylon thread in the bobbin so that it will stretch a little bit. So here I'm just going to be using a zigzag stitch because that will stretch. And I'm actually going to be sewing using the zigzag stitch. I'm going to start here at the center back where I started the elastic. So I'm going to use a zigzag stitch, and I'm just going to make sure that one of the stitches comes over this edge, and that will kind of conceal this raw edge of the strap that we just put on. Of course, if you didn't put straps on, you're ready to go. Just zip it through your machine and you'll almost be done. So I'm actually going to set well, since this is a half, I usually, for the full size, I usually set it for 4mm by 4mm. So I'm probably going to take that a little bit more narrow since this is a half size. And all of my zigzags that I usually use is, again, 4mm by 4mm. Okay, so we are almost done. We've got the straps on, we've turned the elastic over. All we have left to do is this hem. And there's a 1-inch hem here. And what you can do is you can overlock this edge if you want. If you have a cover stitch machine, there's no need to do that. We just need to turn this up 1 inch, and then I'm going to use a zigzag to zigzag it down. So I don't really like to press knits, a lot of knits, unless they are 100% cotton, have a synthetic in it, whether it's nylon, polyester, elastane, or spandex. So what can happen if you leave the iron on too long is that it will melt the fabric, or it will give it a really nice shine, but it will only shine in that area where it was pressed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this around so I can actually get in there easy enough. So I'm going to just use my chalk. Now you could also just take your time and pin it up 1 inch, but instead of pinning, and I'll go ahead and pin it in parts, I'm just going to mark 1 inch from the edge, and I'm going to put marks all the way around, and that way I know that I just need to turn it up that much as I'm sewing. So I'm just going to work my way around here. So I'm just going to get this all marked, and then I don't usually do the overlocking at the edge when I'm hemming stuff that is knit, because it doesn't usually unravel, and my zigzag stitch or my cover stitch will actually cover and clean finish the edges as I sew. But I'm going to go ahead and do that for you, so you'll see that me doing that. If you like that look, that's completely fine. So I'm just going to finish up marking this 1 inch. And then after you overlock it, if you want to, again, if you want to pin it, just turn it up on those marks, that 1 inch mark, and then go ahead and pin it in place if that helps you, and then zigzag it just like I zigzagged the top here, with one stitch catching over the edge, and that will keep your hem really nice and flat, and then you won't have any other hem allowance sticking out there. So I'm going to do that all in the next videos without talking you through it, because I think it's kind of self-explanatory. Again, if you want to overlock the edge, turn it up the 1 inch, pin it in place, and then zigzag along the edge. Again, I'm using a 4mm length and 4mm width. It will be a little bit different on this because it's half size, so I've just kind of adjusted that for the size of the garment. Again, so I'm just going to run this through the overlock and then run it through the zigzag machine. And there you have it. The bandeau dress is finished. So now if you want to press the hem, if you didn't press it before, you can of course give it one final press. My suggestion is to use a press cloth. So before you press this, lay another piece of fabric, preferably a cotton or wool, and then press it so you get a nicer crease at the bottom. But this is your bandeau dress or cover up with straps. And of course, if you don't want to have the straps, then you won't add the straps. You will just have the bandeau dress without the straps.